Today I'm going to read from my fanfiction, Tanya and the Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 1. Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've been waiting for. Tanya to Gurchow's perspective. Finding oneself reincarnated with memories of a past life is supposedly an uncommon situation. Finding oneself reincarnated twice with the memories of both previous lives makes one question just how common reincarnation really is. Not that I spend much time dwelling on such pointless philosophical issues when there are far more immediate and pressing concerns. Concerns including the fact I am once again in an orphanage. Thankfully, the situation is not nearly as dire as my previous life. The nuns were not much different from my previous experience, but the building was an improvement. A bit drafty in the winter, but electric lights and central, if not efficient, heating was a welcome improvement. The food was also a step up. While not the nearly putrid excess of sausages, the bland fare suited me a bit better. If only I'd been born... Come on, Peak. Sorry about the cats. If only I had been born to a country that understood the value of proper seasoning or how to correctly prepare a dish. Both my current and my most recent life have had to deal with an abundance of boiled, bland food. At least this one uses condiments, even if their favorite is vinegar. Come on, sushi. On a much brighter side, I was born in a modern nation during a time of relative peace. And if the history I'm seeing correlates as well to my first life as it appears, the relative peace will become actual peace in less than a year when the Soviets' communist nation collapses under the weight of an untenable economic policy. A life free from war in a respectable nation was a life I could find satisfaction with. I just needed to find a way to use my advantages to overcome my disadvantage of being an orphan. 2 lifetimes of experience has given me enough of a leg up that many around me consider a prodigy, a genius, a future leader. While I know from experience that I'm not any of those things, I also know that perceptions of others is important, and that playing the role of a highly gifted individual should enable many doors locked to those in my socioeconomic class to be opened. Before I could fully grasp my future, though, I needed to figure out if the magic I had was a holdover from my previous life, or if I needed to be concerned that I was not the only magical individual in the world. I could feel the mana flowing through my body, and while shaping it into something useful was difficult without an orb, it was not impossible. Reflex and body enhancements in such crude manner would be unsafe, as would any of the combat spells I knew. The only safe spell I could utilize was illusion casting, a specialty that I used to great effect in my last life, if I do say so. A small ball of light in the palm of my hands was all the proof I needed that I still had magic. For now, I needed to keep my power secret, until I was sure it's safe to find a way to profit off of it. It was several months after I first managed to prove to myself that the mana I felt was indeed magic, and not a phantom itch that the orphanage had a visitor. A visitor that asked for me by name. The head matriarch of the orphanage stayed for the meeting, and the pair made an unusual sight. The head matriarch was an older lady in a nun's habit, with a severe demeanor, though I knew she put a lot of effort in keeping the orphanage going. The other woman was far more brightly dressed. I was reminded of the hippie movement that she would have been a child for looking at this woman who introduced herself as Professor Burbage. "What institute are you the professor at?" the head matriarch asked. Before I answer that, I have a question for the two of you. Has any unexplained events happened around young Miss Jurikoff? Things moving around, items changing colors, anything at all? Are you suggesting magic is real, and that is why you are here? I asked, reading the unspoken message in between her words. The technology to detect magical capacity must be more advanced in this world compared to my previous, despite at initial glances at being as unmagical as my first. Yes, I am the Muggle Studies professor at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. You mean to take Tanya to some special heathen school to learn sorceries? I promise you, we are not a heathen school. We provide the finest magical education available, and Miss Jurkov has been selected to join our facilities. Is there a scholarship to go along with this offer? I would hate for my education to put an unnecessary burden onto the orphanage that has spent so much time caring for me. It is unwise to leave scholastic finances in the hands of a financially struggling institute, no matter the intentions. As you are an orphan with no living relatives to help with the financial costs of your education, your tuition and educational materials will be covered by the orphan fund, though you will not be allowed to board at the school over the summer breaks and will need to return here. The matriarch looked at me before nodding her head. That will not be an issue. Please give us some notice so we can ensure a bed is made available for Tanya. Now, then, Mr. Gorchov, we have your school items to gather up. Here's your acceptance letter, and within is a list of supplies we will be getting today. The envelope I was handed was thick and made out of parchments instead of the more standard paper. Inside was several pages. One was a form letter signed by the deputy headmistress. Nothing particularly noteworthy on it. The next was a standardized list for first-year students. Looking the list over, I saw that our education appeared to be primarily focused on magic and not deal with other subjects much. The mention of a wand was interesting, as that appeared to replace the orb of my last life as magical conduit of choice. Well, if it can calculate spells, what did I care what it was called? From the point of view of Charity Burbage. Every year, a number of Muggle-born or raised students would be selected to join Hogwarts, and it was the job of the teachers to collect and introduce the students to the wizarding world. Most of the effort would typically be placed on the 4 heads of houses, as well as the other teachers of the first-year students. Unfortunately, the number of first-year teachers capable of doing the task was far fewer than what it appeared on paper to be. Professor McGonagall, in addition to being the head of Gryffindor House, was also the deputy headmistress and had other responsibilities. Professor Binns was a ghost. Professor Quirrell only recently changed post to being the defense against the dark arts and needed time to work on his lesson plans. Even though Professor Burbage was in a new position as well, taking up Quirrell's former post, she already had her lesson plan ready, having been putting in applications for the position for several years already, and happily volunteered to go into the Muggle world to collect the orphan Tanya de Gurchov and introduce her to the wizarding world. The walk to the nearby subway station gave Burbage a chance to look at the latest Muggle's creations and fashion. Looking down at her young companion, Burbage noticed Tanya's eyes were scanning the surroundings. Her stride was rigid, and she seemed to have a tight control over her young energy. We will be taking the underground to central London, and from there we will go to Diagon Alley, the primary shopping district for a British magical community, Burbage explained to the girl. I am not familiar with Diagon Alley. I would imagine not. The Muggle and Wizarding world are kept separate on purpose. You mentioned Muggle before, that you are the Muggle Studies teacher. What does that mean? Muggle is our term for people without magic. In Muggle Studies class, we teach students from purely magical backgrounds about what has occurred in the Muggle world and how to blend in. Tanya's head turned to look at Burbage, and her brightly colored sundress and rose-tinted glasses with a raised eyebrow. I am aware my outfit is not what the Muggle children of the day may describe as hip, but I rather enjoy the Muggle culture scene of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Besides, fashion is cyclical and it is coming back in style. Right, Tanya said before looking down at her second-hand clothes. Not like I have much room to talk myself. The orphan fund will include a small amount for clothing. It won't be anything special, but it will be in better condition. There is also a little room for a few other extra items, but we will get those last. Pulling out the equipment list, Tanya looked it over. How are we to carry all these items? Even if thin, 8 books quickly adds up in weight, plus blaster skills and a telescope are not the easiest to carry items. Our first stop after the bank will be to a second-hand luggage shop. We'll get your school trunk there and pack up the rest of your items into it as we go. Tanya nodded as she looked over the list again. How much of the list can be acquired secondhand? And what do I need to have new? The books, telescope, and scales can all be gotten secondhand without issue. The cauldron and files will have to be examined closely to ensure they are in good condition before getting secondhand. Your robes will have to be new for a few reasons, and never trust a second-hand pair of protective gloves. And there's only one trustworthy place to get a wand. Tanya fell silent as she seemed to think on the matter. How much will all this cost, and how much does the orphan fund give each year? I can't answer for each year. When you get your letter with the equipment list next year, you will also get a voucher you will use to get the funds you will need to pay for your equipment next year. But this year should be the most expensive. Several of the books you are getting should last throughout your 7 years at Hogwarts. The robes should last 2 years unless you get big enough growth spurts, and can be tailored to a bit to work for an extra year or two depending on how quickly you grow. Your wand and other equipment should be good for your entire time unless something goes wrong. This year it should be around 50 galleons if my estimation is right. I'm sorry, but I thought the British currency was the pound sterling. What is a galleon? Burbage reached into her satchel and pulled out a few coins, and handed a silver, gold, and copper one to Tanya to look at. The gold one is a galleon, the silver is a sickle, and the copper is a nut. 29 nuts to a sickle, 17 sickles to a galleon. And it is about 5 pounds to a galleon, depending on the current exchange rates. Tanya weighed the coins in her hand before returning them to Burbage. I take it that they are not actually made out of these metals, because that much gold would be worth much more than 5 pounds nowadays. I do not know how the goblins make their coins, but you are probably right. An ex-boyfriend of mine used to go looking for lost treasure, and when he traded the gold coins he found, he got several galleons per coin. The two continued their trip in silence. Burbage paying for the subway tickets for the two of them, and ignoring the looks some cast the pair's way, until they reached a rundown-looking pub in between two other businesses that most people seemed to ignore as they walked past. The Leaky Cauldron is the primary entrance from the Muggle world to Diagon Alley, concealed by a charm that prevents Muggles from seeing it. Burbage explained as she led Tanya into the building. Hello, Tom. Ah, Miss Burbage, good to see you. And who is this? The old barman responded. A new student, Tanya de Gurchoff. Mr. Gurchoff will be starting at Hogwarts in the autumn, and we are just stopping by to gather her equipment. Oh, a student, you say? So they finally gave you that job. Good for you. Thank you, but I really should not stick around and chit-chat. Of course, you know the way. And Mr. Gurchoff, if ever you need a room to stay, do remember the Leaky Cauldron. Tanya gave a short bow to Tom. Thank you, Mr. Tom. I will be sure to keep that in mind. With that, the pair went through the back door to a small area behind the bar with a brick wall on all sides and a single trash can. Pay attention to what I do to open the way into Diagon Alley. Once you have your wand, you will be able to as well. From the rubbish bin, it is 3 bricks up and 2 over. Tap with your wand, and Burbage allowed the moving of the bricks in the large archway to finish her sentence for her. Welcome to Diagon Alley. Tanya's eyes scanned the colorful, busy alleyway. Closer to a street in her opinion of the width of the walkway, before looking up at Burbage. her expression lacking the wonder Burbage was expecting. You said we were going to the bank first, correct? Yes, Burbage said, leading the way to the large marble structure of Gringotts. Gringotts Banks is the primary financial institute run by goblins. As long as you follow the rules, there should not be any trouble. Burbage pointed Tanya towards a large poem written on the entrance of the bank. Basically, don't steal. Got it. Tanya made eye contact with the goblin guard standing at the entrance, and the guards stared back. A small nod was passed between the three that Burbage missed as she led the young girl inside and got into the queue to see a teller. Getting to the front of the line, Burbage pulled out a note and a wooden key that she handed to the teller. After reading the note and looking down at Tanya, the teller directed his gaze back to Burbage. The child is joining the first-year class and needs funds for the orphanage fund? Yes, Burbage answered, with no hesitation. Wait there. The goblin got down from his seat and went back with the note and key. After a few minutes, the goblin returned with a small sack of coins and a form. Sign here. You here. 2 signatures later, the goblin placed the wooden key on the corner of the form and stamped over it before handing the coins over. Next! Leaving the bank, the two headed down the alley till they got to an older shop full of well-used furniture. Let's check here first for a trunk, Burbage said as they entered. Looking around, they found several options. A couple were with paint beginning to flake off, one that had a few questionable stains, and a few in good condition. Looking them over, Tanya took a deep breath before looking at the person running the shop, squaring her shoulders and trying to look so adult. How much for this one? Tanya asked in an adorably firm voice, indicating the one with the lock. The clerk gave a smile at the effort to appear adult. 5 galleons. A sour look crossed Tanya's face, even as Burbage was about to pull out the money. 5 galleons? What? Does the truck have some sort of enchantments on it? Maybe something to make it lightweight or shrink it down? That's far too much for a plain chest. 1 galleon and 8 sickles. The clerk's eyes narrowed, and a shark-like grin spread across her face. Burbage closed her eyes as she saw where this was going. 1 galleon and 8 sickles? Why, that is robbery! Far too low! You might as well just take my shop, too! No, that is a finely built truck with a good lock, and the keys are solidly built. 4 galleons, 5 sickles. Good luck! I could pick that lock easily. Burbage turned out the haggling. She supposed she should have seen something like this coming. The orphanage likely did not have much money, and Tanya probably saw the nuns haggle for supplies a few times. Knowing how this was likely going to happen all day, and that Tanya was just trying to make the budget go as far as possible, Burbage planned on the non-negotiable items towards the end. The wand robes had flat costs attached to them. Several hours of negotiations at multiple shops later, Burbage and Tanya had nearly completed the shopping with a significant amount of coinage remaining. The coins now firmly in Tanya's possession, as Burbage did not wish to continue ending in the bartering. Now at Madame Malkin's getting measurements for their hair robes, Tanya was able to spend a few moments not arguing over every little detail of the items being purchased. The school robes had a set price. Tanya was told that haggling here would not work, and that the wand shop next would also have a set price for the wand. Burbage sat next to the trunk that was filled with purchases, taking a moment to relax and reflect on how this must be similar to the feeling her exes felt when she took them shopping. After several minutes enjoying the blissful silence, Madame Malkin finished her measurements and asked Tanya to step down and that the finished robes would be owled later. So it is time for the wand? And Tanya asked as Burbage stood up and tapped the trunk with her own wand so it would float behind the two. Yes, we will be going to Ollivander's. His shop is about the only reputable shop for getting wands. You do not want to be getting your wand secondhand, because it's rare to find one that is a good match. So wands are not a standardized item? If you mean that each one is the same, no. Each wand is different. I don't know all the details, but apparently the wood and core all go into how well they fit with a given user. Stepping into the dark, dusty store, Tanya's nose scrunched up at the smell before voice spoke behind the two. Now, who do we have? Tanya's reaction was quick. Her spine straightened before her elbow found purchase in the old proprietor of the shop's groin. A moment later, he was flipped onto his back in front of the two ladies. Tanya, what in the world was that? Burbage asked in shock. Tanya took a deep breath and calmed herself before giving a bow and reaching out to help the old man up. I apologize. You startled me, and I don't know what came over me. Ollivander gave Tanya a smile as he was helped up. So I did. Those are some quick reflexes, little one. Now tell me, what is the name of my new customer? Tanya de Gerchoff, sir. I will remember that, Mr. Gerchoff. Now, I suppose you are here for a wand. Let's see if we can find you a match. Ollivander went to his shelf full of boxes and pulled one down. Blackthorn, unicorn core, 10 3/4 inches, firm. Give that a wave. Tanya took a hold of the wand, and with a flick, a gout of flames came out. No, not that one. Ollivander took the wand away and handed Tanya a different one. The cycle going on for a few minutes until, yes, I think I know just the one. Ollivander went to the far side of his counter and pulled a box out from underneath. Fair. Phoenix feather core, 12 1/4 inches, reasonably springy. Try this one. Grasping the wand, a small smirk appeared on Tanya's face as she gave a flick and a stream of sparks came out. Yes, that is the wand for you. Somewhat unusual wand. Ollivander's demeanor became more serious. I expect to see some extraordinary things from you. The wand chooses the wizard, or witch in your case. And that wood is the survivor's wood. It is a poor choice for those indecisive and favors those who are focused and strong-willed. Ollivander then gave a smile. I think you already know that about yourself. That'll be 7 galleons. After baying, the two ladies left the store and Tanya carefully putting her wand away in the trunk. Tanya, do I need to tell you not to hit the other students while you're at Hogwarts? Burbage asked, giving Tanya a serious look. No, ma'am. I should not have done that. I was just not expecting anyone to appear behind us. Burbage gave a nod. Well, I cannot exactly give you detention right now for what you did, as you haven't even started school yet. But if you do something like that again, I will be strict with you. Understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. Now you still have some money left, and we have time before we need to take you back to the orphanage. So how about we get you some outfits for when you're out of class? Tanya gave a simple nod, and the two headed towards one of the second-hand clothing stores with some nicer options. The wooden key... So, that's the end of that chapter. There's a couple of notes that I put into this chapter. The first one is on the wooden key from the Gringotts scene. Completely non-canon, but my footnote is that the wooden key is a special one-time use key. Certain vaults and accounts have access to special extra features, like granting one-time passes to the account for withdrawal, often with certain limitations. In the case of this story in this moment, the orphan fund can be accessed by a given orphan 7 times for their educational expenses, so long as they have one of the single-use keys and a note explaining what materials they are meant to purchase. Again, this isn't canon. I just felt like this was a reasonable extrapolation of what we see in canon. In canon, we have keys for the vaults. All vaults, from what we see, have a key. But how are people meant to get funds as a one-time off thing from like a trust fund? Why not a wooden key? Why not some sort of way to symbolize, hey, this isn't... You don't return this key. They hand you the key showing they have a right to access a certain amount of money. And then the goblins go collect the money, hand it over, and it's all good. The second footnote is on the wand that I ended up giving Tanya. So there is a lot of wand lore that has been put out in supplemental materials, particularly Pottermore, on what all the different wand cores and what the wand woods mean. Now, between the three main cores that Ollivander's uses, because he only uses 3, you have Phoenix, Unicorn, and Dragon. Unicorn, I feel, would have made a good fit with Salaryman, but because Tanya has died twice at this point, I felt Phoenix was more thematically appropriate. Rebirth, that sort of thing. However, with that said, if Ollivander had Threshold hair, I feel that would have been a better match over the Phoenix. Because Thresholds are the horse of death. As for the wood, I have a lot of notes here, basically explaining why I didn't choose different woods, why I ended up choosing fir. So, looking through the long list of different woods, I had narrowed it down to cherry, yew, holly, fir, red oak, elm, and blackthorn. Now, I wrote all this stuff a while ago, so I'm going to have to check my notes on what my logic was. But I knocked holly and yew out quickly because I didn't want to copy what Harry and Voldemort had. That was the whole reason. Then we get to elm, because the Pureblood plotline that I could follow with that one did not interest me. Elm has a lot of associations with purebloods within the lore of Harry Potter. I don't remember the exact things behind that, but I was like, yeah, I'm not interested in exploring that plot line in that way. Eventually I do start exploring a pureblood plot line a little bit, but that's all speculation on a certain character's point of view. Other characters have different ideas of what's going on with her, and pretty much everyone gets it wrong. Because who's going to guess that she's 2 times reincarnated and remembers those previous lives? It's a little out there. Much more believable, oh, she's some pureblood scion, or she's a fairy, or whatever the hell another character who will come up, and you'll really get to understand that character in Chapter 5. But there's a character that'll just go on random tangents. Next, I knocked out Blackthorn because after dealing with combat, it supposedly gets better. And this fic is not a combat-focused fanfic. There will be combats, but that's not the primary driving force behind this fic. As far as the Tanya side of things, this is more of a slice of life. She's just trying to live her life going through Hogwarts. That's all she wants. Everything else will result in other things. But the main through line for this fic is a slice of life. So that's why I knocked out Blackthorn. I didn't want this to be all about the combat. Next was Cherry. Her first life was as a Japanese salaryman, and honestly that just ended up seeming too obvious to me. And I went back and forth on it, but in the end I just decided, no, that's too obvious. So I chose fur out of what remained because surviving with a focused, strong-minded, and intimidating demeanor, which all works well with fur, does fit Tanya very well. She is very strong-minded. She's a social chameleon, so she'll change up how she acts, but she does get ideas stuck in her head and sticks with them. And she is very focused. If she has a goal in front of her, she will pursue that goal. Hence why Youjo Senki, or Saga of Tanya the Evil, has her being such a good mission commander. She gets sent on missions, so she has a goal, and her goal she focuses on and goes after and completes. And then intimidating. She nearly scalped a guy. Well, there's arguments on whether or not she would have gone through with it. The point is, she had a guy at her feet while a cadet and was threatening him at knife point. Even from a little girl, that's pretty freaking intimidating. Now, there's two other things about wands: length and flexibility. Length, short wands tend to indicate a sign of something missing in a person's personality. To look at probably the best example in canon, Professor Umbridge. She is missing a lot of positive traits. She's just a big old pool of the worst of humanity. Even Voldemort was a nicer person than her. Even Voldemort was capable of love, if you believe Cursed Child, because he was able to at least conceive a child. I don't think Umbridge would have gone through all the way with a plan to have a child. I seriously think she's less capable of love than Voldemort, the guy who literally does not understand love. So, short wand, definitely out of the ballpark, because I don't feel Tanya's missing anything from a personality perspective. She's not a perfect person, but she's not deficient. And then long ones are those with big, grand personalities. Somebody like, let's go with Gilderoy Lockhart. Big, bold statements. Woof, woof. He has, from what I understand, a pretty long wand, because he's very flamboyant. From there, you have like an average range of 9 to 14 inches, with the average being 11 and a half at the middle point. So I went with 12 and a quarter. Tanya has a bigger personality than average, but I wouldn't say massively so. And then for flexibility, Tanya's a social chameleon. She'll change how she acts, how she behaves to fit in. So adapting to new situations very easily. So I went with reasonably springy for the descriptor of how flexible her wand is, to show off how she's reasonably springy in adapting. And there's a few other things I want to comment on. So first off, I had somebody comment that it was a bit odd that I chose an orphanage, when this is set in about 1990, 91, basically. Actually, this chapter is 91, because this is the same year Harry went to Hogwarts, and in canon, he went to Hogwarts in 91. And in Britain at that time, orphanages had been mostly phased out already, which is something I didn't know. I'll admit, I did not know that at the time. So I dug a bit deeper about, okay, when exactly did orphanages go completely out in Britain? And there's not an exact answer. It's just hard to find the exact answer. I'm sure somebody has it. I couldn't find it. I'm a fanfic writer. I'm not doing hours of in-depth study into the history of orphanages in Britain. But I did a deep dive as much as I could and found late 80s, early 90s is about when the last one would have gone out. So I just went, okay, I can use that, I can push this out. This is one of the last ones. Which actually gives me plot lines for the future. The fact that orphanages are being phased out is actually going to be a plot point. Around the end of this first book, beginning of the next book. So in between first and second year. That is going to be a plot point. How? I'm not going to say yet. But it is. The other thing was the whole, why a Catholic orphanage run by nuns? That one, I chose that mostly just because previous life she was raised by nuns. This first chapter I was being very lazy with. I will fully admit that. I was lazy in my choices. But that laziness has given me options in the future. So why an orphanage, and why was she seemingly so willing to let Tanya go? If she was such against heathens. I actually have her comments on that in a later chapter. The head matriarch does comment on that later. Because I realized when asked that, it's like, you know, that's a good point. I had her talk about heathens and complain about that, and then she just seemingly went along with it. Why is that? Tune in for around Christmas in story for the answer to that. Or you can just read the fanfiction. But if you're just going to follow along with these videos, which hopefully I'm actually going to follow up on, you'll find out in the Christmas episode. Anyways, I think that'll be all for tonight. Have a good night.